The roar of the motorcycle echoed through the quiet parking lot as a group of bikers pulled up near a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where locals stopped for coffee and travelers passed through without much notice. The evening sun cast a warm glow over the scene, making everything look peaceful. At least, until one of the bikers decided to turn a harmless moment into a joke that would change everything. Among the customers outside the diner was a young girl, no older than 10, standing beside a large German shepherd. The dog sat alert, his deep brown eyes scanning the surroundings, his ears twitching at every small sound. He wasn't just any dog, he was a trained K9 service dog, wearing a clearly marked vest that signaled his role. But to the man on the motorcycle, he was just another pet. And he was in the mood to stir up some trouble. With a smirk on his face, the biker sauntered over. His leather jacket was worn and dusty, his boots heavy against the pavement. The other bikers chuckled from their spots, waiting to see what he was up to. The little girl tightened her grip on the dog's harness, sensing something wasn't right. "Relax, kid," the man said, flashing a grin as he nudged the dog lightly with his foot. The German shepherd didn't react, staying perfectly still, just as he had been trained to. That seemed to amuse the biker even more. "What's wrong?" "Too scared to do anything," he laughed. Then, in one swift motion, he lifted his boot and gave the dog a firm kick. The reaction was immediate. The dog sprang to his feet, a deep, rumbling growl escaping his throat. The little girl gasped, stepping back as the animal's training took over. The biker had expected a startled yelp or the dog running away. He hadn't expected this. Before he could step back, a firm voice cut through the tension. "Stop. Right there." The air grew thick as a man stepped forward from inside the diner. He wore a plain black t-shirt and jeans, but there was an undeniable authority in his stance. His eyes locked onto the biker, cold and unwavering. "That's not just a dog," he continued, his voice even but deadly serious. "That's a K9. And you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The biker's smirk faltered. The other riders had gone silent. The German shepherd stood at the ready, every muscle tense, waiting for a command. The little girl's hands trembled as she reached for her father, the man who had just spoken. And then, in the span of a heartbeat, everything changed. The biker's smirk had completely disappeared now. His eyes darted between the man standing in front of him and the German shepherd, which remained perfectly still but radiated an unmistakable tension. The dog wasn't barking or lunging, but that was what made it even more unsettling. It was waiting, watching, calculating. The other bikers, who had been laughing just moments ago, shifted uncomfortably on their feet. They had seen their friend pull pranks before, mess with people just for fun, but something about this moment felt different. The air had changed. The man standing in front of the biker took another step forward, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "That dog," he said, his voice steady, "is a highly trained K9. He doesn't react like a regular pet. He follows orders. And right now, he's waiting for one." The biker scoffed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping into his chest. "Come on, man. It was just a joke." His voice wasn't as confident as before, and the others noticed it too. The little girl pressed herself against her father's side, her small hands gripping his shirt. She wasn't crying, but her wide eyes showed how shaken she was. The German shepherd, still silent, moved slightly, positioning himself between the girl and the biker, his stance protective. "Do you think that's funny?" the father asked, his tone calm but firm. He wasn't raising his voice, but there was an authority in it that demanded an answer. "Hurting an animal just for a laugh?" The biker glanced at his friends, looking for support, but no one said a word. He could feel his palms starting to sweat. This wasn't going how he had expected. "I didn't hurt him," he muttered. "It wasn't even that hard." The father took another step forward, and the biker immediately stopped talking. "You don't know the damage you could have done," he said. "You don't know his training, his instincts. You don't know who he protects. The biker swallowed hard. The little girl, still clinging to her father, found her voice, though it was small and shaken. Max isn't just a dog, she said softly. He saved my life. The biker frowned, caught off guard. What? The father put a hand on his daughter's shoulder, steadying her. You have no idea what you just did, he said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. You see a dog in a vest and think it's just some kind of pet. But Max isn't just a dog. He's been trained for situations you wouldn't believe. The biker shifted on his feet, not sure what to say. One of the other bikers finally spoke up, breaking the silence. Look man, maybe we should just go. His voice was low, almost cautious. But the father wasn't done. No, he said, his eyes still locked on the man who had kicked the dog. You need to understand. Because next time you might not be so lucky. The biker's throat felt dry. He had been in fights before, had his share of close calls, but there was something about this moment that made his stomach twist. It wasn't just the dog, it was the way the father was looking at him. The way he spoke like he knew things, like he had seen things the biker couldn't even begin to imagine. The father glanced down at Max, then back at the biker. Do you know what happens when you attack a K9? The biker didn't answer. The father took a slow breath, his jaw tight. Max isn't just my daughter's protector. He's mine too. And he was trained to take down threats. Trained to fight, to detect danger before it even happens. He was in the service before I brought him home. He's saved people. Real people. Not just my daughter, but others too. The little girl looked up at Max, her fingers brushing against his fur. He saved me in the accident, she said, her voice quiet but certain. The biker blinked. Accident. The father exhaled, his expression darkening just slightly. A year ago. A car crash. She was trapped. Max got to her before I did. He didn't go into details, but the weight in his voice said enough. The little girl nodded. He pulled me out before the fire started. The biker suddenly felt like he was standing on unstable ground. He had only been trying to mess around, maybe get a laugh, but now it didn't feel funny at all. The father's gaze stayed locked on him, unblinking. So tell me, he said after a long pause, do you still think it was just a joke? The biker didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. His friends shuffled uneasily, waiting for him to say something, to do something. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't have a comeback. Max was still watching him, his muscles coiled, his body language controlled but unmistakably ready. The father took a step back, never breaking eye contact. Then, finally, he said the words that sent a chill through the biker's spine. Walk away. While you still can. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, without another word, the biker took a step back. And then another. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't say anything. He couldn't. He turned on his heel, walking briskly toward his motorcycle. His friends hesitated, glancing between him and the father before deciding to follow. The engines roared to life. And then, just as the biker thought he had put enough distance between himself and the father's piercing gaze, he heard the little girl's voice one last time. You shouldn't mess with heroes. He glanced in the rear-view mirror. Max was still standing there, unmoving, watching, waiting, and for the first time in a long time, the biker felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Regret. As the biker sped away, the sound of his motorcycle echoed through the empty parking lot, but his mind was anything but clear. His hands gripped the handlebars tighter than usual, and his chest felt heavy. He had spent years acting like he didn't care, that nothing could shake him, but that moment back at the diner, the way the father had looked at him, the way the dog had reacted without a single bark or growl, it left a strange unease settling in his gut. His friends rode beside him, but none of them spoke. They had seen him get into fights before, stir up trouble just for the fun of it, but this was different. They all felt it. After riding a few miles, they pulled into a gas station, the bright fluorescent lights buzzing above them. The biker parked his motorcycle and pulled off his helmet, rubbing a hand over his face. One of his friends, a guy named Darren, finally broke the silence. "What the hell was that, man?" The biker exhaled sharply. "I don't know." Darren scoffed. "You don't know? Since when do you let some random guy and his dog shake you up?" The biker didn't answer right away. He leaned against his bike, staring at the cracked pavement beneath his boots. "That wasn't just some random guy," he muttered. "And that wasn't just a dog." The others exchanged glances. They had all heard what the father had said, how the dog had saved his daughter, how it had been trained to handle real threats. But they weren't the type to dwell on things like that. One of the others, a guy named Rick, shrugged. "Look man, you just got called out. It happens. Forget about it." But the biker couldn't. Because it wasn't just about getting called out, it was about that feeling. That heavy, suffocating feeling in his chest that he couldn't shake. It wasn't just guilt, and it wasn't just regret. It was something more. And then he realized, he had seen the father's face before. That was why it felt wrong. Why the moment had carried a weight he couldn't understand. He straightened up, his heart pounding a little faster. "Hey," he said suddenly. "Do any of you recognize that guy?" Darren frowned. "The dad?" The biker nodded. "Yeah." He looked familiar. Rick rolled his eyes. "Dude, you're overthinking this." But the biker wasn't convinced. He had spent enough time in different places, met plenty of people. He knew when someone's face stuck with him for a reason. And this guy, the father? There was something about him. The way he stood, the way he spoke, the way he had handled the situation without flinching. "Just drop it, man," Darren said, reaching for a pack of cigarettes. "We got better things to do than worry about some dad and his dog." But the biker's gut told him otherwise. And that feeling only grew stronger when, later that night, he found himself staring at his phone, scrolling through old news articles, searching. It took him almost an hour, but then, there it was. A headline. A picture. Former officer and K-9 partner honored for heroic actions. And in the photo, standing next to a younger version of that same German Shepherd, was the man from the diner. The biker stared at the screen, his heart hammering. The father wasn't just some protective parent. He was a former cop. And Max, that dog had been more than just a rescue. He had been on duty. The biker sat back, rubbing a hand over his mouth. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way the man had spoken to him. The way the dog had reacted, not with fear, but with control. The reason the tension in that moment had been so thick. He hadn't just messed with some guy's pet. He had kicked a trained police K-9. And worse, he had done it in front of the man who had spent years relying on that dog to have his back. The biker swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around his phone. This wasn't over. And somehow, he had a feeling the father knew that too. The biker couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at his chest. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself it wasn't a big deal, but the more he thought about it, the more it sank in. He had messed with the wrong person. And the wrong dog. Days passed, but his mind kept circling back to that moment at the diner. He remembered the look in the father's eyes, the absolute control in his voice. That wasn't just some guy trying to be tough. That was someone who had been in real situations, someone who had faced actual threats. And the dog? The way it reacted without panic, without fear? That wasn't normal. It was trained, disciplined. It knew exactly what to do, and that was what scared him the most. One night, sitting in his apartment, he found himself staring at his phone again. He had kept the article open for days, rereading it over and over. The man's name was Jake Lawson, a former officer, honored for his bravery. There was a whole section about Max, the K9 who had helped track down criminals, sniff out explosives, and even save lives. And he had kicked that dog like it was nothing. The thought made his stomach turn. But what was worse was the nagging feeling that this wasn't over. Jake didn't seem like the kind of man who let things slide. And Max? The biker had a sinking suspicion that once a dog was trained for duty, it never really stopped being on guard. The paranoia started creeping in. At first, it was small things. Feeling like someone was watching him when he stepped out of his apartment. Noticing a black SUV parked down the street that hadn't been there before. The sound of a dog barking in the distance when he was alone at night. It got worse when he was out riding. One evening, he was heading home from a bar, the cold wind biting at his skin as he rode down the empty stretch of road. He told himself he was imagining things, that he was just on edge because he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. But then, in his rear-view mirror, he saw it. Headlights. A car was following him. Not close enough to seem aggressive, but close enough that it didn't feel right. His hands tightened on the handlebars. He took a turn onto a smaller road, testing to see if the car would keep going straight. It didn't. It followed. His heart started to race. He picked up speed, taking another sharp turn. The car stayed with him. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he pushed the throttle, weaving through the backroads, trying to lose whoever it was. But the car never fell too far behind. It stayed just close enough to make sure he knew it was still there. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the headlights vanished. He looked back. Nothing. His bike skidded slightly as he slowed down, pulling off onto the shoulder of the road. His pulse was hammering in his ears. He waited, staring at the empty stretch of pavement behind him. No car. No movement. Nothing. It was like it had never been there. But he knew what he had seen. And for the first time in a long time, he felt real fear. Not the kind of fear that came from getting caught in a fight, or running from the cops after pulling a stupid stunt. This was different. It was calculated. It was controlled. Just like the man at the diner. Just like Max. The biker swallowed hard, his breath coming out uneven. This wasn't a coincidence. Jake Lawson hadn't forgotten about what happened. And if he was behind this, the biker wasn't sure if he was being warned or hunted. The biker sat there on the side of the road, his breath heavy in the cold night air. His heart was still pounding, his fingers gripping the handlebars tighter than before. He had been in bad situations before, had plenty of close calls, but this felt different. It wasn't random. It wasn't just bad luck. Whoever was in that car had wanted him to know they were there. And then, just like that, they had disappeared. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, listening to the eerie silence around him. The road was empty, the trees along the edge swaying slightly in the breeze. But every shadow felt sharper, every sound felt louder. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. After a few deep breaths, he started his bike again, trying to push the paranoia away. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe it was just some random car that happened to be behind him. But deep down, he didn't believe that. He took the long way home, switching up his route twice just to be sure he wasn't being followed. When he finally pulled into the lot outside his apartment, he sat there for a moment, scanning the area. No strange cars. No signs of movement. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. As he made his way inside, he hesitated before locking the door behind him. Something felt off. The apartment looked the same as he had left it, but there was a strange, almost unnatural stillness in the air. He walked through the small space, checking the windows, making sure everything was as it should be. Nothing seemed out of place, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Then his phone buzzed. He nearly jumped. Pulling it out of his pocket, he frowned at the unknown number flashing on the screen. His finger hovered over the answer button, hesitation creeping in. Something in his gut told him he already knew who it was. After a deep breath, he answered. Yeah. Silence. Then, a familiar voice. Calm. Controlled. You're not as hard to find as you think. His stomach dropped. It was Jake. The biker swallowed, forcing himself to stay steady. You got something to say? Another pause. You're used to being the one in control, Jake said finally, his voice even unreadable. A guy like you think you can do whatever you want, that there won't be any real consequences. The biker clenched his jaw, gripping the phone tighter. I told you. It was just a joke. No, Jake said. It wasn't. The biker felt a chill run down his spine. There was no anger in Jake's voice. No threats. Just a simple, undeniable certainty. I know your name, Jake continued. I know your record. I know the kind of things you've gotten away with before. The biker's pulse spiked. How much had this guy dug into his past? You like to play games, Jake went on. You think you're untouchable. There was a beat of silence. Then Jake's voice dropped lower. But you don't know who you're dealing with. The biker felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had been in plenty of fights, had pissed off plenty of people, but this was different. Jake wasn't just some guy with a grudge. This was a man who had spent years tracking criminals, reading them, finding them, and now he was watching him. The biker forced out a small, humorless laugh. So what, you gonna come after me? You think that dog of yours is gonna hunt me down? Another pause. Then Jake said something that made his blood run cold. He already found you. The biker's breath caught in his throat. And then, a sound. A low, steady growl. It was coming from inside the apartment. His body went rigid. His mind raced. He turned slowly, his pulse hammering in his ears. And in the dim light of the room, just beyond the doorway, two glowing eyes stared back at him. Watching. Waiting. The biker's breath hitched as he locked eyes with the shadowy figure in his apartment. The low, steady growl sent a shiver down his spine. His muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at him to move, but he was frozen. Max. The dog stood just beyond the doorway, his body motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. His ears were perked, his gaze locked onto the biker, unblinking. The dim light from the street outside cast a faint glow over his dark fur, making him look almost ghostly in the silence. The biker's mind raced. How had the dog gotten inside? Had Jake been here? His grip tightened on his phone, but he could still hear Jake's steady breathing on the other end of the line. I told you, Jake's voice came through, calm, unwavering. You don't know who you're dealing with. The biker swallowed hard, forcing himself to take a step back. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Max didn't move. Call him off, the biker said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. You made your point. Jake didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he said, Did I? The biker felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. This isn't funny, man. I never said it was. Max still hadn't moved, but there was something in his stance, something controlled. He wasn't lunging. He wasn't barking. He was simply waiting, and that made it worse. The biker's hand inched toward his pocket, where he kept his knife. I wouldn't, Jake said, almost lazily, as if he had already predicted the move. Not unless you're willing to see how fast he really is. The biker hesitated, his fingers curling into a fist instead. You broke into my place, he growled. This is illegal. Jake let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh. So was what you did. The biker clenched his jaw. I didn't do anything. Jake's voice lost all humor. You think that kick didn't mean anything? You think it was just a joke? He paused, his tone turning icy. That dog spent years saving lives, taking down real threats. and you put your hands on him like he was nothing." The biker opened his mouth to snap back, but something stopped him. The way Jake spoke, it wasn't just anger. There was weight behind his words. A deep, steady emotion that the biker couldn't ignore. "You don't have to like me," Jake continued. "You don't have to respect me. But you'll respect him." Silence. Max still hadn't moved. The biker's pulse was pounding in his ears. "What do you want?" he muttered. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "I want you to understand." The biker swallowed. "Understand what?" Another beat of silence. Then, a sharp whistle. Max's ears twitched. And just like that, he turned and padded toward the door, his growl fading into silence. The biker exhaled shakily, his shoulders still tense as he watched the dog disappear into the darkness. His mind was still racing when he heard Jake's voice one last time. "You're lucky." The call disconnected. The biker stood there, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. He didn't move for a long time. Finally, he walked over to the door, yanked it open, and stepped outside. The street was empty. No sign of Jake. No sign of Max. Just silence. And yet, as he stood there in the dim glow of the streetlights, a strange feeling settled in his gut. He had gotten the message. Loud and clear. This wasn't just about a dog. This was about respect. And for the first time in a long time, the biker realized, maybe it was time to change. The biker stood outside for a long time, the night air cool against his skin. The street was still empty, just as it had been a few minutes ago, but everything felt different. The quiet wasn't just quiet anymore. It was heavy, like it carried something unseen. Like it carried him. His heart had finally started to slow, but the tension in his chest remained. Max was gone. Jake was gone. And yet, their presence still lingered. He ran a hand down his face, letting out a breath. Maybe he should have been relieved. It was over, right? The message had been delivered loud and clear. He had been lucky. Jake could have done a lot worse. But instead of relief, all he felt was small. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one in control. And for the first time, he realized that maybe he never had been. He turned and walked back inside, shutting the door carefully behind him. The apartment was exactly how he had left it, except it wasn't. The stillness, the weight of the air, the knowledge that Max had been right there just moments ago, it all made the space feel different. His gaze flickered to the spot where the dog had stood. He could still hear the low, steady growl in his head, feel the sharpness of Jake's words in his chest. He had messed up. Bad. He had spent years pushing buttons, getting into fights, stirring up trouble because it made him feel untouchable. He had told himself it was all just fun, that none of it mattered. But tonight had proven otherwise. Jake hadn't hurt him. He hadn't threatened him. He hadn't needed to. Because for the first time, someone had made him think. He sat down on the edge of his couch, staring at his hands. They had been steady when he'd fought, when he'd stolen, when he'd done all the reckless things that made up his past. But now they were shaking. Because he finally understood. Max wasn't just a dog. He was loyalty. He was discipline. He was something bigger than himself. And Jake? He was a man who had dedicated years of his life to protecting others. Someone who had put himself in danger time and time again because it was the right thing to do. And here the biker was, thinking he was invincible because he could throw a punch and run from the consequences. But this time, he couldn't run. The next few days felt strange. He kept expecting to see that black SUV again, kept expecting to feel eyes watching him, but nothing happened. The world just kept moving, as if the night with Jake and Max had never happened. But it had. And he could still feel it. He didn't tell his friends. He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he kept to himself, replaying it over and over in his mind. The way Max had stood there, the way Jake had spoken to him like he already knew the type of person he was. Like he knew that deep down, he wasn't really as tough as he pretended to be. It messed with him more than he wanted to admit. Then, a week later, something happened. He was at a gas station, standing outside his bike, when he saw a guy arguing with the cashier inside. The dude was big, aggressive, jabbing a finger in the kid's face, his voice loud enough to be heard from outside. The biker didn't usually care about things like this. It wasn't his problem. He wasn't a hero. But for some reason, he didn't look away. Instead, he watched. And he saw something he hadn't noticed before. The kid behind the counter. He was young, maybe 19. And he was scared. He wasn't mouthing off. He wasn't trying to fight back. He was just stuck, looking smaller and smaller as the guy leaned over the counter, shouting. The biker felt something tighten in his chest. And before he could even think about it, his feet were already moving. He walked inside, slow and steady, keeping his hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything at first, just positioned himself a few feet away, just watching. The angry guy turned, noticing him for the first time. "What the hell are you looking at?" The biker just stared. He didn't smirk. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't try to pick a fight. He just looked. And something in his expression must have been different, because the guy hesitated. He mumbled something under his breath, then grabbed his stuff and stormed out. Just like that. The biker didn't move right away. He waited until the door swung shut, then slowly turned back to the cashier. The kid still looked shaken, his hands gripping the counter. "You good?" the biker asked. The kid blinked, then nodded quickly. Yeah, thanks man." The biker just nodded. Then he turned and walked out. The moment stuck with him. Not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't do. For the first time, he didn't jump into something for his own ego. He didn't try to prove anything. He just stood there. Like Max had. Like Jake had. And that was enough. As he rode away, the wind rushing past him, he thought about how easy it would have been to go back to his old ways. To pretend like that night never happened. But the truth was, it had. And whether he liked it or not, it had changed him. He wasn't sure what that meant yet. But for the first time in his life, he was ready to find out.